The final version of the most recent veterinary feed directive rule went into effect October 1 of 2015. There was a little bit of confusion because although we had a new rule, it only applied to the drugs which are currently veterinary feed directive drugs. The big change will happen January 1, 2017, when a whole bunch of new labels go into effect, which means that some drugs we can use today, buying them over the counter without veterinary authorization, will begin to require veterinary authorization. At this time, all medically important antibiotics used in the feed or water of food animals will require veterinary authorization. For those used in the feed, this will be in the form of a veterinary feed directive. For those used in the water, this will be in the form of a prescription identical to what you would currently require to go purchase a bottle of a prescription injectable antibiotic. The veterinary feed directive is a written instrument, it cannot be verbal, provided by a veterinarian within the scope of their professional practice, which authorizes the use of a medically important antibiotic in or on the feed of a food animal. The veterinary feed directive must be provided by a veterinarian within the scope of a valid veterinary client-patient relationship. This is where the veterinarian is familiar with the client's operation, has assumed the responsibility for making medical judgments about the care and treatment of the animals, and the owner has agreed to follow those directions. The veterinarian must have made recent and timely visits and medically appropriate visits to the premises and must be familiar with what's going on. They must also be available for follow-up. The drugs that are affected by these label changes are termed medically important antibiotics. It's probably easier to talk about the ones which aren't affected. This would be the ionophores, which you would know by the trade names Rumensin, Bovatec, or Catalyst, the flavomycins, GainPro, drugs such as bacitracin, Tiamulin, trade name Denagard, and Carbadox or Mecadox, which are used in pigs. These are ones that will not require a veterinary feed directive. They may still have growth promotion claims, and they do not require that a veterinarian authorize their use. On the other hand, the medically important antibiotics will require a veterinary feed directive. Any claims for growth promotion will be removed coming January 1, 2017. This group includes the tetracyclines. You'd know them as chlortetracycline or aureomycin, terramycin, which is oxytetracycline, that go into the feed. AS700, combination of a tetracycline and a sulfa, is also medically important. Neomycin is one that's medically important, and all of the sulfas again, and you'll see those for both feed and water. These will require a veterinarian to authorize their use. Another very important aspect of their use is that the veterinarian may only legally authorize label use. This means that if you look at the label, there are specific indications for use, and these may not be deviated from. There's also a specified duration and a dose. So when you and your veterinarian decide that the use of a medically important drug in the feed is appropriate, your veterinarian may only authorize the use specifically as indicated on the label. Absolutely no alternatives. An example would be chlortetracycline, labeled for 10 milligrams per pound of body weight per day for 5 days for treatment of bovine respiratory disease. That is on the label. You have an indication, which is treatment of bovine respiratory disease. You have a dose, 10 milligrams per pound per day, and you have a duration, 5 days. None of that may be altered in any way. One of the questions is, well, what about foot rot? What about pink eye? What about seminal vesiculitis in bulls at a bull test? None of those are on the label and may not be legally authorized by the veterinarian. That veterinarian must be licensed at the place where the cattle are being housed, or the pigs, or any food animal. This means that if you live on the border with Oklahoma, live in Kansas, and the cattle are going to be in both Kansas and Oklahoma, the veterinarian must be licensed in both states in order to provide a lawful VFD for use of a medically important antibiotic in both of those places. Now back to the non-medically important antibiotics, there is one exception where a non-medically important antibiotic may need to be included on a veterinary feed directive. And that would be the example where Tylosin is fed concurrently with Rumensin. Tylan Rumensin, a common combination in feedlot rations. If Rumensin is fed by itself, a veterinary feed directive would not be required. If Rumensin is fed concurrently with Tylosin, the veterinary feed directive for Tylosin, which is a medically important drug, would require that the Rumensin be authorized for concurrent use on that veterinary feed directive. It is also very important to understand that drugs can only be fed together in the feed if they are cleared for concurrent use. Concurrent use of drugs which are not approved to be fed together is illegal. Concurrent use includes practices such as top dressing on a prepared feed, and also includes practices such as AM/PM feeding, where one drug is fed in the morning, one in the afternoon. All of those would be considered concurrent feeding. There's been some angst about how we move forward with this. I think there's going to be numerous veterinary client-patient relationships formed that might not have otherwise occurred, and these should be started to be formed now. While you're watching this video, you should be thinking about how do we go out and form these relationships. For some clients and their veterinarians, it's already in place. They have numerous interactions about the health of their animals. You're good to go. For people who have been using these drugs without interaction with a veterinarian, it's going to require that a veterinarian meet the requirements of a veterinary client-patient relationship to work with you and your animals so that a valid veterinary feed directive may be provided. Some of the questions to me have been, well, isn't this going to cost something? Yes, it should. The veterinarians are able to return a lot of value to you and your animals for this interaction. And my personal opinion is if the veterinarian that is part of the veterinary client-patient relationship isn't able to help you achieve the value of that relationship, there are a lot of veterinarians out there who work very hard through their education and continuing education, as well as interacting with experts all the time. They work very hard at that to provide you with that value, and I encourage you to find you a veterinarian that will provide you that value. So the big date is January 1, 2017. We should start to see these new labels around fall or so, and then we will have to be having a veterinary feed directive in place so that the new labels may be used January 1, 2017. Your veterinarians are working hard at continuing education and understanding the new veterinary feed directive. We may not have all the answers yet, but many of us in veterinary professional organizations are actively engaged with the FDA, with feed manufacturers and distributors, so that we're ready to enact this January 1, 2017. So your first action, get with your veterinarian, start the conversations that will lead to valid veterinary feed directives so that you may use these medically important antibiotics for the appropriate reasons starting January 1, 2017.